Hello and welcome to this webinar on supplier diversity. I'm just looking at the people who are joining in. There are a few people who are awaited. They'll be coming in a bit in a bit, but we have had a decent response. Let's say I've seen people registering from Europe largely, and then there are people from Asia, some of them from Asia, US, Canada, Brazil, and so on. So it's good to see everyone here. Okay, and I'm just looking at the people here. I can see some recognizer. I can recognize some names. We have Antonio. All right, hi, Antonio. All right, good. So let's start off. What we're going to do normally, I'm used to having an interactive session. Unfortunately, this is not going to be the case today. It's going to be a bit more of a shortish monologue, let's say, and then you have, of course, the chance to interact with me through the chat. So I have Fred as well, who is behind, who is there for support. He is moderating the chat, and he will then send the moderated comments, questions, whatever you have onto me, and then I can pick up some questions and um, some comments from there. Okay, that's the idea. The webinar is going to last for, let's say, 30 to 40 minutes, and then we can pick up on some questions. Okay, a quick word about myself. So I'm Manish SHANBHAG. I'm with the EIPM. So EIPM is the European Institute of Purchasing Management, and I'm doing multiple roles within EIPM. Today, I'll be presenting you this webinar is the capacity of the role of looking at newer topics typically that we do at EIPM as well. Okay. Right. So on supplier diversity, let's move on. Okay. So in terms of what we're going to look at today in today's webinar, we're going to look at what is supplier diversity. Okay. I'll refer to it as D as in short. What is the value add of supplier diversity? Executing a supplier diversity program, a little bit of theory about what we have seen, and then some recent developments in SD programs, and then effectively some practical approach for businesses. Okay, so when I hear all this, what do I do with this information? Right, so there's some practical approaches for businesses to, if I want tomorrow to integrate supply diversity program in my organization, I want to start off something. How do I start off? What do I do with it? That's the idea. One key point, and that's why I've written it right at the beginning here, is when we are talking about diversity, the very notion is not to have it as a tick, it's not a box to check effectively. The idea is it should be within the DNA of the organization. It's a reality, and it should be felt deeply, let's say, and held and valued by everyone in the organization. So that's the idea. Okay, it's like any other similar kind of topics which fall in the same bucket. Let's say we talk about sustainability, we talk about environment, we talk about health, talk about decarbonization, etc., right? The multiple topics. It's something similar. It's not just a checkbox, but we are looking really to get into it deeply. And if I want to implement it, what do I do with it? Okay, so that's the idea. Let's look at what supplier diversity is. Okay, what is the definition of supplier diversity? So here I've just put in some basic information about the definition of diversity itself. So diversity, the word itself, diversity comes from Latin origin, diverse, which means different or various. Okay, so the idea is, if you look at diversity definition itself, it's the practice or quality of including or involving people of different social and ethnic backgrounds, genders, sexual orientations, and so on. So we are looking at different, like it's like a kaleidoscope of different people. Okay, so that's the definition of diverse. In terms of supplier diversity in the business context, typically we define that it's a business strategy that guarantees a diverse supplier base, which means, in other words, supplier diversity, it refers to building of a supply chain that encompasses businesses possessed by diverse entities. And who are these diverse entities? These are diverse entities, that is the people who are coming from different social and ethnic backgrounds. So there's cultural diversity, then there is age diversity, then there is gender diversity, and so on and so forth. Okay. There are some example categories I just mentioned, which are largely here. You see here people comprising the groups that we are talking about are people who are of color, women, veterans, disabled, and so on and so forth. Now, these are very sensitive topics. In whatever way you say, these are sensitive topics. Some might feel very strongly about it. Why should I be categorized as this? Why should I be that? But the idea it is inclusion. This has come from history, years of development of history. But it's good thing that we are referring to it now. More and more organizations are embracing this, and we take this forward from here, right? So there are these examples, let's say, of smaller or deprived groups, as we say, typically. Now, again, this is very sensitive, as I said, but the groups that are referred to are these, and eventually we try and include this as a part of our supply chain. That's the idea. When we say we are building a supplier diversity program, we are trying to build a supply chain that encompasses and includes these different groups. Okay, that's the notion of supplier diversity. Now, the supplier diversity gives a lot of value add, and there are some numbers that we'll also see, but there are some benefits that I have highlighted here where we talk about the value add of supplier diversity. And the value add is not only for the buying organization, which is building the supplier diversity program, but also for the suppliers, right? Also for the suppliers. And as a buyer or as a seller, we need to identify these what we call win-win situations. Okay, I've identified 6 elements here. Okay, so this is not exhaustive, as I mentioned. Just identified 6. There could be plenty other benefits that might be a result of your supplier diversity programs, right? But it's a win-win on both sides. That's the key. There's the 6 buckets that we have seen. One is boost innovation. Okay, so looking at innovation, we'll go through these a little bit in detail in the next few minutes. Good press or media coverage. You have top talent attraction. So this is within the organization, top talent attraction. Social impacts. Obviously, you're creating a big social impact through this. It also gives you access to newer markets. Okay, and then we are also talking about adherence to compliance. So you're also compliant with whatever regulations that some organizations or government agencies might put in place. Okay, so let's look at these. We're talking about the first one, let's say boosting innovation. Okay, more over the years, what we have seen is suppliers are a very strong source of innovation. Okay, we have seen multiple programs. One of my colleagues does this research in a bit more in detail, looking at outside in innovation that comes from suppliers and then is put in within the organization, right? So suppliers are a very strong source of innovation, and when we have a diverse supplier base, it gives that much higher potential of coming up with innovations. Okay, because there are new mindsets, new perspectives, new ideas, and so on and so forth. And there is also a higher possibility of a quick ramp up. When we talk about these suppliers are also looking to provide inputs, looking to innovate, and looking for buyers who can buy their ideas. Okay, so it's a two-way traffic. As a buyer, you can get access to innovation, and as a seller, you have a channel or an avenue to sell your innovation. Okay, so that's the first part. It does boost innovation. There are plenty of examples. I wouldn't go through all these examples. There are plenty of examples where the diverse group of suppliers has brought in innovation that the company had no access previously to. Okay, how do you do it? You foster an inclusive environment. So there was one article I was reading somewhere, and there was one of these sentences that I liked very much, which says, which said, diversity is including you in a group. Let's say you're going to a party, diversity is including you in the party, and inclusion is asking you to dance. I like this simple definition very much, so I thought I'll share it with you. So the idea is to foster an inclusive environment. So you're not only doing this to check the box that we talked about, but you're asking the suppliers to participate. You're asking the suppliers to make an environment, create an environment which can help this group of suppliers to showcase their ideas, to showcase their perspectives, and then you have newer mindsets also that can be showcased. Okay, there are certainly more opportunities than risks. I'm not saying that these don't come with risks. Certainly there will be risks, but there are plenty more opportunities than risks. So you identify the opportunities, identify the risks. You could develop co-development programs. So you work together with this supplier in order to boost your innovative capabilities. Like to give you an analogy, it's a little bit like if you're working with any established, or let's say there's a startup, yeah, and you're working with the startup. While the idea that you might get from the startup might be very innovative and so on and so forth, the startup is also looking to sell their ideas to buyers, potential buyers, right? So it's a two-way communication, it's a two-way traffic, and that can help you look for different ideas. The other thing that it does, it gives you a good press, yeah, good media coverage. More and more consumers are becoming conscious of this topic. In the Gen Z or Gen Y and Gen Z parlance, we say woke. You know, people are getting more and more, people are becoming more and more woke, which is aware, a bit more open-minded, right? And the consumer, your final consumer, is very much aware of this. The Gen Z and Gen Y are putting purpose over profits. They want to see which are the organizations that are engaging in supplier diversity, sustainability, decarbonization, and so on and so forth, right? So they are putting some purpose over profits while choosing products, while choosing services. And it's only going to grow in the coming years, right? They're also more aware of empty promises. We talk about greenwashing. We talk about many organizations which are doing this just for sake of doing it and checking the box, as I said. But these conscious consumers are fact checking behind, and they're more aware of empty promises. So you don't want to get into the bad books of the consumer, right? So when you're including the supplier diversity programs and doing it genuinely, communicating it genuinely and engaging yourself genuinely, it gives you access again to consumers that are more conscious. And again, because of that, you have a higher and stronger, let's say, consumer base that you can access. It also gives you, again, of course, as I said, good press or good social media coverage, right? How you could do this is there are some organizations that are also involving the Gen Y and Gen Z in programs. There are interns, they're inviting interns, etc., to develop, to give ideas, share ideas. How can we build a diversity program? So it already gives you, as a buyer, as a buying organization, good ideas, good ways in which you can engage the new conscious consumer. Okay, so innovation, then you have good social media coverage. On that, you have top talent. On top, you have top talent. So employees also prefer to work with companies with supplier diversity programs. So there has been plenty of surveys that have been conducted, and employees are also, like we have seen here, Gen Y and Gen Z putting purpose over profits. Employees are also preferring to work with companies with supplier development programs. Okay, you have conscious consumer as well as conscious employees. Okay, while there might be let's say you might encourage the employees with compensation. It is not compensation alone that is going to help you retain top talent. Yeah, there are employees who are looking at more of innovation mindset, looking at all these different programs that you have within the organization. That is going to attract this top talent. Okay, so if you are, let's say, in the human resource, or if you want to attract top talent for your organization, communicating about advertising and communicating about your supplier diversity program and being genuine about it is important. That makes you as an attractive prospect. It also can help you, you can also help by provide and giving recognition to the right people within the organization. So it helps you again to attract top talent. Okay, then the other part comes is the social impact, right? Clearly, when we are trying to involve diverse suppliers within our supply chain, you actually cascade that effect onto the next levels within the supply chain. So you have these diverse suppliers. Those diverse suppliers are then largely going to include similar types of suppliers within their supply chain. So you have not only a tier one impact, but a tier two impact. Yeah, tier two impact. So it's not only a direct impact that you'll have, you're going to grow that multifold. That impact that you'll have will be multifold, and hence the social impact increases drastically. Okay, if you're doing it very locally, you have more local jobs created. Of course, you're contributing to your environment, social governance, ESG objectives. So this is a part of your ESG objectives as well. Okay, how you do it, again, you could have a separate budget for diverse suppliers on certain community projects or certain we'll talk about a bit more business oriented projects later on, but you could also start off with having separate budget for community projects. You could have tie up with organizations, right, NGOs and so on and so forth, which work in this area, and you could see that immediately you'll have a social impact. And this is all tied up. When you have a social impact, when you communicate, you have top talent, you have good press, you have the conscious consumer. So you can see that this is all network. These are all the same pieces of the jigsaw that we are trying to solve. Okay. Uh, some other benefits, when you have a diverse supplier base, we are talking about access to new markets as well. So here you're talking about suppliers who can be customers, right? Your supplier can also be your customer, and it opens up new market segments. We talk about all these different market segments, right? We talk about all the diversity in the suppliers. So women owned enterprises or veteran owned, you have the LGBTQ, etc. community, then you have the gender, you have the age related aspects. So this opens up access to new markets and new geographies as well, right? So you're effectively getting extended customer base. You can see the benefits coming out clearly from an extended customer base, right? Directly contributing to the top line of your company. Okay, how do you do it? Again, you could work closely with co-selling with these suppliers. So you're working with a supplier who is diverse. They have access to their own communities. You could work with co-selling, profit sharing, revenue sharing mode with these sellers, and you can build that eventually to get access to newer markets. And then finally, you have compliance. So you have, as a part of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, UNSDGs, you're compliant with that. You're also compliant with certain audits that you might have. There are certain rules and regulations. We'll just talk about that in a bit in the next couple of slides. But there are certain rules and regulations, government agencies, regulatory agencies that have come up with certain laws and regulations, and you're already compliant with that when you have an SD program in place. Okay, so working closely with authorities, regulatory authorities, certification bodies, which have certified these different suppliers, and when you include them in the supply chain, you become compliant in whatever law or regulation that has been passed on. Okay, so you can see a lot of benefits. There are some other benefits that you can see from the supplier diversity program. You could help in reducing the racial wealth gap if you have certain suppliers coming from a certain race, increasing your tier two spend within those races. We hold our suppliers and yourself accountable, right? So you are into it, you're working closely, you can foster job creation and so on and so forth. Yeah, you have plenty of benefits that you have. The numbers that I have mentioned here are critical. For example, you can see that what I mentioned in terms of 64% millennials, so the Gen Y and Gen Z that we are talking about, they are uh, kind of rejecting, let's say, companies that have a very poor corporate social responsibility, in defining supplier diversity as a part of your corporate social responsibility. These millennials say, if an organization doesn't have a supplier diversity program or a robust CSR policy, I'm not going to join that organization, or I'm not going to work with that organization. So this is more and more popular in millennials, and these are the people who are going to be in the workforce, who are going to form the core of the workforce in the coming years, right? So this is something which is important. There are a lot of investors. So investors are investing in DIE strategy, what we say diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. So a lot of the companies are also highlighting their DIE strategy to investors to attract more money and build equity. Then you have one other, which is very interesting fact. So this is minority and women-owned business enterprises, MWBEs, as we say. So minority and women-owned business enterprises have given roughly 8.5% year-on-year savings for organizations when the average was close to 4.5%. So 4% more savings are being provided by these minority and women-based enterprises to these organizations. Again, there could be multiple reasons for it, but the fact is that it has provided higher savings. So we are not just talking about including a supplier diversity program uh, because you want to do it as a part of your CSR project or whatever might be the initiative behind, but it is also giving a lot of other benefits in terms of cost, innovation, and so on and so forth. We've seen plenty of benefits that we can have. Okay, so these are some of these benefits that we can see. Having said this, how do I execute a supplier diversity program? So I'm going to talk about that and then finally again touch upon the practical approach that we're going to have. In terms of execution, just a guideline. I put in just a guideline, some of the basic, let's say, prerequisites. And I'll just focus on the box, the text in the box here. So definitely, again, repeat that it should not be just a check the box program, but a real core in your procurement strategy. Okay, if you're wanting to bring suppliers in the supply chain from these diverse backgrounds, it should become a core of your strategy, not just saying that, oh, I have this in the panel, I'm going to keep them just to be compliant with some audits. Absolutely not. That's not the idea. It should be a core of the procurement strategy. Okay, there are some guidelines that you could do. You could start looking these are the guidelines more to set up a base, let's say. You can run your current list of suppliers through filters, okay, through filters, and identify diverse suppliers. So depending on how you define diverse suppliers internally, as I said, there could be multiple categories. It could be by age, there could be women owned, there could be veteran owned, there could be LGBTQ community owned, and so on and so forth. Plenty of criteria that you will put it. So identify those first. It is not necessary that you have to work with everyone. Yeah, that is something which is important. So which suppliers, who are the ones that you would choose to work with? Yeah, there might be a specific program that you have developed. You identified some very specific innovative capability within a supplier. You could work on that. Yeah, and so on. Join an advocacy membership organization. So there are plenty of authentic, let's say, and validated certification agencies who can certify these suppliers as diverse suppliers, right? So you could join some of the advocacy membership organizations. They're pretty popular in the US. They are fairly popular in Europe. It is growing. In the UK and other areas as well, it's growing. So there are certain advocacy membership programs. You can look up your country and then find out who are these supplier diversity advocacy programs, and then join them, and then you can get into the network or get into the ecosystem of this base already. Okay, you could do benchmarking figures to start off with. Where do you stand compared to similar other companies? Where do you stand in your program there? And then work closely with legal teams. Of course, you need to work with legal teams. As an example, I've just mentioned you have GDPR requirements for EU, especially. You need to protect the data. You cannot declare certain things you can declare, and so on. So work closely to avoid any issues related to the GDPR policies, especially for Europe. Okay. And of course, promote supplier diversity as a part of your CSR initiatives, as I said, or ESG. And it is important that you should have a mandate from the top. These are the kind of prerequisites, effectively, that once I set this up, I am ready. It's like foundation. I'm ready for launching my supplier diversity program in various ways. And I can give you some practical approach that I've mentioned later on. But initially, these are some of the real basic elements that I need to make sure that are covered in order to launch. Otherwise, I've seen a couple of cases where people are enthusiastic, they want to work on the supplier diversity program, but they're a bit lost, and then becomes a bit of a mess in terms of execution, right? They may not get the right support internally. The data is not clear. Who are the suppliers to choose? That is not clear, and so on and so forth, right? So you want to set up a base. You want to create a preparatory base, and then take as a launch pad, and then work from there. Okay. Some recent developments I've just highlighted in a couple of slides. Some recent developments in supplier diversity programs. One of the important one is, as companies, they could take a voluntary action, but at the same time, there are more and more legislations that are going to be passed in the coming few years, and this has already started. So, for example, you have in Jan 2023, just a few months ago, you have the new Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive has included the supplier diversity as a part of its reporting, right? So this is getting more and more into legislation, like the decarbonization. No, initially it was a more of a voluntary action from organizations. Now it is imposed. It becomes a legislation, right? So over the years, I think that there could be more and more strict regulatory, let's say, regulations rather, that might come into place, where you are pushed to work with a minimum level of supplier diversity objectives. So from voluntary, moving to a bit more legislative. In Europe, especially in 2022, there's a heightened sense of urgency and an opportunity with regard to inclusive procurement, as I said. So more and more organizations are doing this now for various reasons. And again, some of the reasons we have seen, some of the benefits that we have seen. On top, investors are prioritizing companies with a positive DII track record. So if you want to have investors, if you want to attract investors, they are prioritizing companies with a positive DIE track record. Okay. It is a challenge. Yes, the procurement team based in Europe are facing a lot of legal, cultural, business challenges. So within Europe, especially, then you have some different areas, geographical areas as well, where you could have different types of challenges. Different types of challenges, because all the different geographical regions are not at the same maturity level of understanding in supplier diversity, right? But the key point is to overcome those and then build. Some companies have started to do that already. The ESDP as well, so European Supplier Diversity Project, was launched last year at around this time. So these are some of these elements that are happening. You can see there's a lot of movement happening. There's a lot of impact spend, the new term. So I have a spend. Let's say I'm spending 100 euros as a part of my procurement spend. How much of that is impact spend? So how much of that is a spend that I'm dedicating to my SD program? Okay, so if I'm buying 100, let's say 10 or 20 is being bought from suppliers who are diverse suppliers. So 20% becomes my impact spend. Okay, and beyond that, as I said, it's not only tier one, it's going to impact um, the downstream of the supply chain as well. Okay, so there's some developments, there are some numbers. I won't get into the entire graph per se, but there are some numbers of 6 countries. So you have Germany, Sweden, Ireland, France, Netherlands, and Belgium. So I've just picked it up from the European Commission's Handbook of Supplier Diversity in Europe. Tells about some data, but important point is to see here, we're talking about minority supplier diversity organization. So you can see largely there is a huge potential. Let's say that the green ones that we talk about talks about ethnic minority share of population, migration background share, employees who are employers who are non-EU migrants, and so on and so forth. Okay, for these countries. Is there a diversity charter? Yes, there is a diversity charter. However, the minority supplier diversity organization does not exist, right? Or what we call We Connect. So it's more of women entrepreneurship programs, or again, equity and diversity promoting chamber of commerce that we have. LGBT, so EGLCC is, and an organization that is promoting LGBT rights as a chamber of commerce for them. Effectively, while there are plenty of opportunities that existing, the countries are still not there yet. Okay, and they're getting better and better. There are some positive actions that are coming up, and this is what which is a good thing which is happening. So there is potential, there are plenty of opportunities to increase and to diverse your supplier base within the supply chain. Not yet there, but the potential is there. Okay, we are not yet there, but there are positive actions that are coming up. This is some numbers from the US. Okay, so you can see here US companies have committed more than 50 billion to minority and women owned businesses over the next 10 years. Okay, so this is Fortune 200 US companies. They're going to commit more than 50 billion, yeah, to minority as a part of their supplier diversity program. So you can see this development again moving towards this direction. Okay. Um, Having said that, now the last part. So we see some recent developments that are happening. The last part is, what do I do now? How do I start? Where do I start? So this is one suggestion. This is one recommendation that I've come up with, a small model. Okay, in terms of prioritizing. So let's say your organization is category based, or whichever based. This example that I've taken here is a category based organization, let's say, where in order to start off a supplier diversity program, if I'm a category based organizations, like plenty of organizations all over the world are, how do I do it? I want to first look at what is the stakeholder engagement, internal stakeholders as well as external stakeholders. Okay, what is the level of stakeholder engagement, okay, for including supplier diversity. The second is, what is the compliance and regulatory requirement? If I'm actually uh, uh, you know as I said about legislative versus voluntary, here it talks about legislative more and more. So what is the compliance and regulatory requirement? Is it low or is it high? And I'm going to plot my different categories against these two elements. So let's say I'm managing category one. Is there a compliance and regulatory requirement to manage this category? And is there a requirement to include supplier diversity? At the same time, for this category, what about the stakeholder engagement? Is there potential? What about when I talk to my internal stakeholders, when I talk to my external stakeholders? Do I have enough suppliers in this particular category? Do I have enough internal support that I will have? So I just plot this. The size of the boxes are purely the spend of the categories. Okay, so the larger the spend and the smaller the spend is defining the size. So what I'm going to do is, if there is a high compliance and regulatory requirement versus if there is a high stakeholder engagement and there's a significant spend, let's say, I'm going to prioritize this particular category and then say, okay, I'm going to look for suppliers, the diverse suppliers for this particular category for some specific actions. It's just an easy way to start. Okay, rather than getting confused of, oh, what do I do now? I have so much data, I have so much this, what do I do now? It's a bit more practical approach. And typically we are doing, as procurement, we are doing this quite regularly. It's just that we need to identify the right axis. Maybe this is a suggestion that I have, but maybe there are some other elements that you can build up. But idea is, try and identify which are the priority action plans that I want to take. In this particular example, I have put stakeholder engagement versus compliance and regulatory requirement. Maybe there's some other there are some other axes that you could include, but it's the idea is to prioritize. How do I start, and where are the categories that I would want to work with? You know, category is one example. If your organization is geography based, so maybe I'm going to start with this geography. So maybe geography could be another element instead of category. Just to give you some ideas, so you can develop your ideas eventually and then build on your own some kind of a prioritizing matrix that can help you to say, okay, now I would need to start with this. What do? I check my supplier base. I check the checklist that I have given, that I mentioned before. advocacy programs, looking at support from top management and so on and so forth. And I'm starting to build my supplier diversity program there. Okay, scrutinizing suppliers, including them, then eventually filtering some of them and seeing which are the best suppliers that I can include in this program. Okay, so that's one approach. And then finally, I would say uh, it's a bit more, as you can see here, the areas that you need to strengthen, a bit more data driven, robust fact based approach towards supplier diversity. So you could have a very data driven accountability, right? Having the right KPIs in place. I want to, for example, if I'm buying, if my category spend is 100 million. Today, I have, let's say, zero diversity suppliers in this entire 100 million. In the next 5 years, I'm going to have 5%, 10%, or whatever target that you put. So it's a very data driven accountability that you can put in place, right? KPIs, teams are accountable, and eventually you can grow this program with such kind of a monitoring. Proactive planning. So again, if this is an example that I've taken, is largely category based, as you can see. Starting the category planning ahead of time. Now, bringing in diverse suppliers earlier, and for some very specific projects, you could do that as well. So engage the diverse suppliers even earlier in the planning, while maybe the design is being built, or you're working internally with the stakeholders and so on. You can bring in outside in ideas as a part of your proactive planning. Then you have the other examples, connecting business goals to diversity goals. So you could have also building these direct relationship between the supplier diversity team and business leaders outside of procurement. So it's not only procurement's responsibility, we are moving outside, make the legal team aware, the marketing team, finance team, and others. So you're building and spreading this information outside of procurement. Of course, this, once you do that, the collaboration across company makes it easier, right, to engage the suppliers. And then you have the data, as like we started, the balancing data, using data to prioritize relationships. You could have eventually to see, based on the analysis that you do, eventually when you build this using KPIs and KPIs and SLAs and so on and so forth, uh, which are the suppliers that I would choose, which are the business units that I would work with a larger base. How do I change my KPIs from 5%? Do I move to 10%, and so on and so forth? So we are looking at balancing data and relationship eventually. Okay, so it's just to give you the last two slides effectively here. We're talking about prioritizing. This is one approach. As I said, it's not the only approach, it's just one approach. And then eventually you could have similar other approaches to give you a really practical case on what do I do, where do I start, if I have to build in a supply diversity program in my organization. Okay. Right. So that's what I wanted to share. As I said, in 30 minutes or so, we are talking about quickly. If you look at the agenda, we looked at what is supplier diversity, definition of diversity, the value add, the boosting innovation, attracting top talent, social impact, and so on and so forth. Executing the supplier diversity program, having some really basic prerequisites and foundation, okay, for supplier diversity programs, some recent developments in SD programs, and then some practical approach as to what do I put in as priorities if I want to start off a supplier diversity program in my organization. Okay. Right. That's what I wanted to share with you today in this short webinar. I'm looking forward if you have any questions. Fred will be moderating this. I'm going to look at the chat as well. Okay. So hello from Canada. Suzanne is from Canada. Hello there. Hi. Good morning to you. Sao Paulo, Croatia. Okay, good. Hello, Antonio. Hi. Good to see you here. Recognize some of the people. Very good. Good morning to you too. Any questions, comments? Feel free to drop in your comments, or if you have if you have your own suggestions, your own ideas, feel free to drop in the notes. I can share it with the other participants. Let's give a couple of minutes for that. Okay. I have one comment here. Let me go on this. 1 second. Let me just. Gideon, hi Gideon. Yeah, I recognize you. Met a while ago, and yeah, in Amsterdam. Very good. Yeah, you're in the process of implementing in such program at your organization. Good to hear that. Very good. Well done. Any plan for supply chain sustainability? Uh, oh, you mean to say in the diversity programs, or I didn't really get that. Supply chain sustainability. Ming, could you elaborate it? You mean to say another topic that we want to consider as a to touch upon supply chain sustainability? Is that right? Yeah, another topic in the future. Okay, yeah. Okay, I'll make a note of that. Yeah, we have done sustainability before, but in general. But yeah, it's an interesting one where we'll talk about supply chain sustainability as well. I think one of my colleagues might be doing this in the near future. I will check that. But yes, we will be. We will have eventually some topics coming around that as well. Stefan says, just wondered what you thought were some of the barriers for minority-led company procurement activities and tenders. Yeah, it's a good point. Some of the barriers for minority-led companies participating in procurement activities. So, in tenders, there are. If you just consider an organization which sets up certain rules, which sets up certain rules. So it really depends. For if you're a private organization, when you set up certain rules, and that's why I mentioned to be as inclusive as possible so that you can get the minority led companies participate in the tenders. If you have certain specific restrictions right at the RFI phase or right at the RFQ phase, you don't want to eliminate them right at the beginning. So, for example, company size could be one example. Typically, uh, majority speaking, many of these minority led organizations are not as huge as compared to some other typical suppliers that you might have. So size could be one element, geographical location could be one, and so on and so forth. So it really depends on the kind of filters that you put and or barriers that you put in place. That's purely based on if you're doing it privately. You're a private organizations, you're free to put in some barriers, right? And let's say if you're doing public procurement, right, it's largely the government, and then more and more governments are realizing that effectively we want to include these, and that's where the regulations come in place. And so in fact the barriers are reducing on the other hand, when it is coming especially to public procurement and so on. I can give you an example. I come from India originally, and there are programs where you have certain very specific benefits given to businesses where you have a 51% stakeholding of a woman, of women in the organization. So if you're if women is a majority stakeholder, there are certain specific benefits, there are certain filters that don't apply for these organizations. So that helps them to jump across these barriers. Okay, so if you're a private organization, please try and make sure that you don't put in barriers up front. Eventually you can filter them later on if it is if it is not the right fit. But right at the beginning in the RFI RFQ phase, we try and minimize some of these barriers to include these different organizations, so that like size or other examples that I gave you. Okay, Stefan, so that's the idea. All right. Suzanne says we're planning an introductory meeting with some buyers to introduce them to SD and want to assess their maturity stage. Do you have suggestions of questions to So this is the okay. You're going to introduce the topic of SD to some buyers. This is what I understood, and then try and guess their and to assess their maturity stage as to whether they are willing or whether they would be willing to buy. And if they are not, how do I improve the maturity so that they are willing? Right. It's a good question. So some of these guidelines that I mentioned here, the first thing is you want to do is make the buyers or let's say what we call sensitize them to this topic itself in the first place. It might be completely new. As an organization, if you're a part of the management and if you're telling your buyers this is what we need to do, the focus should be diluted from moving purely, let's say, uh, to cost savings or other, very classical procurement, very classical procurement tools and techniques, to more about total cost of ownership, the risks that we will have, the CSR projects that we will have, the ESG objectives that we will have, and try and assess those maturity in those levels. So there are plenty of ESG, CSR kind of questionnaires that you will have. I would say pick up those questionnaires, the ESG or CSR questionnaires, and try and identify whether the buyers are mature enough, or whether they understand this enough. So that would be my first step. Okay. So that would be a minimum base that I'm going to create. And the second step is to then say that, we need to include these different suppliers in our organization, in our supply chain, which will give us these benefits like boosting innovation, attracting top talent, good press, etc., and so on and so forth, and then enhance that. So we are creating a base by understanding what is their ESG capability and CSR capability. And then on top of that base, we build and say that these are the benefits that you receive. So you have a standard base minimum that is required. And on top, there are the benefits that you'll receive. And thus make them ready to be accepting this diverse supplier base eventually. I would do it in these two phases, Suzanne. It's just a top of my head solution that I'm trying to think of. Different organizations work differently, but as a generic comment, I would first try and assess to their CSR and ESG capability, understanding, etc. And then moving on, look at the benefits of building a supplier diversity program. Okay, I would do this in these two phases. All right. From maturity assessment form, I'm thinking aloud now. Maturity assessment form. From the top of my head, I'm not aware of this, Suzanne. I'm sorry about that, because we built in our own assessment. But there are plenty of CSR or ESG forms that are available. You can look at some organizations. There are some, like for example, I can say. Uh, we had when I was in one of my previous organizations, we had built this with a consulting company. We had built this mature. It was not for supplier diversity, but we had built this with a consulting company, a form very specifically to design. It was a short exercise, but you can build these forms. Otherwise, on the internet, there are some free forms that are available. If you look at some of the companies like CSR or ESG related companies like EcoVadis, for example, and so on. So there are. I'm not endorsing anything, but it can give you ideas. So EcoVadis is one example, or Credit Risk is one example. You could have some forms like this, okay, that you can build in. But if you want, you could have more details that we can, if you want to actually engage in some of these activities, connect with me separately, that I can give you some specific information on some organizations like this. Yeah. Yeah, I can't endorse, I'm not endorsing any organization here directly. Okay. All right. Good. Anything else? Hello. I'm just trying to look at. Okay. All right. Okay, if there are no more questions, thank you very much for your time. I hope it was interesting just for you to understand what is supplier diversity, and it is coming up very soon across many organizations all over the world. And effectively, we hope we can build a very robust and diverse supply chain going forward. Okay. Thank you very much for your time. Take care. Bye bye then.